This is Not Worth Living, a podcast that features creatives interviewing themselves with a preset list of questions. Unlike other podcasts that feel like conversation between friends, this one aims to feel like eavesdropping on a psychiatrist's visit. Today's episode features
Jimmy Cooper. I'm a poet. I run a small press called Furious Beautiful. I sing in a hardcore band called Texture Freq. My day job is as a bookseller at the Book House in Dinkytown, which has been around for almost 50 years. I'm sitting out here at the Salty Saddle, which is the tiki bar at June Moon's house, which is also where I live. It's a wonderful little spot. It's a wonderful night here in Minneapolis. The weather's really nice. I suppose I'll just jump into our questions for the day. Jimmy, what makes you tick? Good head, sharing good food with good people, cheap beer. It's kind of all I got for that one. Would you open an envelope with your death date? I don't know. I've had this sense the last few years that I'm living inside death. It feels close to me all of the time. I guess a lot of people around me have died in the last 2 years, and before that, some of my most prominent memories of my childhood are watching my mom go through the death of her husband, who I hated, and whose death became an exercise in observation to me. After that, I spent a lot of time as a teenager talking my friends down from suicide. Then it became personal. It was this weird era on the internet. I don't know if anyone else remembers this, but the idea of self-harm and suicidal ideation were very vogue, especially in like 2013 Tumblr. And it seems like a lot of the kids I grew up around had no sense of control in their lives for one reason or another. And self-harm and the idea of taking one's own life were both a site of reclaiming that control and also highly aestheticized, right? Like there were whole accounts dedicated to photos of people's cuts or whatever. We all talked about it a lot. None of those kids died, but I knew that they could at any moment. That is, death was near. I think we're still in a version of that era where mental illness and trauma are highly effective tools to garner social engagement and a massive cultural industry beyond the sort of therapeutic imperative, but self-help books and influencers convincing you that this one hack will, change your life and whatever. Anyways, I grew up, I guess, and people really started dying. My friend and roommate August died in a mass shooting at our house, Nudieland, in 2023. 2 other people close to me had died in the months leading up to it. Others in the years between my sort of coming of age and that summer, but apparently there's a specifically defined class of trauma when you experience both the threat of your own death and someone else's death at the same time that is sort of distinct from either individual iteration of that trauma. I guess I shouldn't intellectualize it like that, but in any event, the prior death site experience had affected me sometimes deeply, sometimes not so much. People die when it's their time sometimes. But when August was killed, I started to feel sort of haunted. Not by him per se. I think about him every day, but it's not like I had a ghost following him around. But it's like my life goes on in this other context now, anchored by nearness to this intensity of the taking of a life or the fragility of life. I feel now that I have a sort of responsibility to engaging with this proximity to loss in my work. It's important to me and also overwhelming to be inside of it and be thinking about how to represent that to other people. So I guess I probably wouldn't open that envelope. While I am deeply curious in a sort of non-morbid way as to what it looks like to be on the other side of the mourning process, I don't really have a vested interest in getting that much closer to my own mortality. What was the first time you remember creating something intentionally? I don't know that I remember the first time I created something intentionally. I was a really creative child. I think everyone probably thought that I'd become a visual artist because I really like to draw and paint and so on. And a lot of the creative people around me were more into the visual world. My stepmom, Jackie, is a tattoo artist, is just one example. She's been doing it forever. Or they were into music. My dad's played in punk bands since before I was born, so I knew a lot of musicians. I didn't really gravitate naturally towards playing music, even though I sing in a punk band now. Anyways, I don't remember the first time I created something on purpose. Creativity, making art were really ubiquitous in my house. So, I mean, it was there all along, right? But I do remember the moment, I think, where I knew poetry was going to be my thing. Despite the massive, wonderfully creative people around me, there weren't a lot of, if any, really, now that I think about it, for whom writing was the thing, at least not sort of subordinated to songwriting or other music pursuits. And I was kind of embarrassed about it, that I didn't necessarily fit into that milieu because I knew I felt drawn to writing, but I didn't really know how that fit into the world around me. Um, I remember once I tried to write a song and I knew that it was kind of trite and terrible. I was frustrated the whole time and I was like listening to a lot of pop radio. I'm like 10 in this scenario, also, maybe like 12. I don't know. In that zone, right? You shouldn't be thinking about if what you're writing is trite, but I was thinking about it because I was listening to all the pop radio. I knew kind of what these songs were and the place they held. Um, Anyways, I think I hated it, and my dad went through my notebook, which I hadn't even really considered was a possibility. He's usually, historically, been very respectful of my siblings and I's boundaries. I have a really great relationship with my dad, whatever, whatever, right? He's one of my favorite people in the world. Anyhow, he tried to encourage me and tell me that he liked it, and I was just mortified. I knew, and I think I knew he knew, some iteration of that dynamic, that it wasn't really good. And I also knew that he had good taste. And I also knew that I wanted better for myself. On the flip side, though, I remember we had an assignment to write haiku based on the weather when I was in maybe fifth grade, so around the same time. I'm not sure which came first in this scenario, but these two incidents stick out in my mind. And I think we had to write like a bunch of haiku and make drawings to go along with them. I know there was at least one drawing. In any event, I fucking hate white people haiku. So much of it totally devalues this like really magical and generative, culturally specific form. Um, and it just, I don't know, it makes it out to be both very easy, you only have to write so many syllables, and profound, I think, because of the perceived tie to like Buddhism or something. Anyways, I'm getting off track. I had to write these haiku for class, right? And when I brought the project home, my dad read it and he seemed genuinely impressed by the haiku I had written about lightning. And I didn't expect that. I had been interested in poetry, but a haiku about the lightning coming down as part of like my science unit was not a kind of writing I had wanted to do in the first place. Um, I haven't seen it in a long time. I don't know if it stands, but it would be a white haiku, and I'm not a Buddhist or Japanese, so, probably doesn't stand. Anyways, it was that moment sort of between impressing my dad, whose opinion I do think very highly of. Like I said, we have a great relationship. I really respect his taste. I think he has great taste, and a lot of that made what my taste is, so I better think he has great taste. But also this idea that I could make this kind of meaning devoid project into something evocative and, I don't know, like real in big air quotes, so to speak. I knew I had tapped into something that I should be doing. And to this day, I've remained primarily a poet, but I think that the sort of creative syncretism of my childhood has really stuck with me. We're all working with what we have and what we want at the same time. And I think the gaps in that produce some of the most interesting work out there. What inspires you at the moment? What's your latest project? But because I have the omnipotence here, as the interviewer, I've seen the questions as well as the interviewee in this situation. I'm gonna roll them into one in terms of the question of what my latest project is. In the last year or so, I think the most dominant category of the kind of writing I've been reading has been these sort of unhinged Southern woman writers. Dorothy Allison, I think, being the queen. Although I read a lot of Ellen Gilchrist and, of course, Flannery O'Connor, and a few others. I'm not going to digress too far here. I read Bastard to Carolina for the first time roughly a year ago, and it blew my mind. She just lays this thorny knot of trauma and desire and the emergent or emerging self out so clearly. And for her, trauma isn't just the sexual trauma that she's so quickly typecast into representing, though that is a large part of her work, right? But it's also the arguably more fundamental trauma of being born into a world that doesn't want you on so many levels and learning deep strength and resilience out of necessity and by example as well, from the similarly traumatized women around her. It's about, in this way, seeing trauma not as something to overcome per se, but integrate into your life in a way that refuses shame outright. Um, And I'm also really inspired by her particular brand of eroticism worked both into Bastard Out of Carolina in the sense that it's a coming of age and she's hitting puberty and so on, but also in the short stories and essays, right? Her sex life is very much part of her life. And that brand is frank and honest and sexy. And it also doesn't shy away from the way that we might integrate the fucked up shit that happens to some of us into our sexual desires and practices, often without knowing it, and the way too that she doesn't let this fall either into a narrative of healing or something to heal from. Um, I think that's really prominent. You know, you go through a trauma, sexual or otherwise, and you have this sort of emotional outcome, or a sexual outcome in particular, and the narrative of healing for a lot of people is either you integrate that into your life and into your sexuality and into your sex life in a way that is positive and progressive and erases it, or you completely remove it from those areas of your life. And Dorothy Allison does a really great job of saying, no, like these things happen to us and we have to live with them. And we don't always choose the ways we live with them, particularly when it comes to sexual trauma. In any event, I bring her up because I do a semi-regular newsletter called the Furious Beautiful Review of Books. That's obviously an offshoot of the whole Furious Beautiful thing. It publishes new writing and book reviews alongside writing about kind of whatever authors are kicking shit around in my head at the moment, you know, people who are inspiring me. And as soon as I finished Bastard of Carolina, I had planned to do the next issue of the review about Dorothy Allison's work, but I wasn't really making any meaningful progress. And then she died. And it sort of kickstarted this idea again, like, all right, I need to get going on this. And my friend Devin shared with me over the phone this really brief and beautiful correspondence that he had had with Allison. And we talked a lot after that, right, about just how deeply her work resonated with us and our lives. We had been friends for somewhere between like 5 and 7 years before this, but it's the first time we discovered, you know, we share this love. Um, and, you know, I'd still been kind of just hitting a wall with writing about her. And we had this, you know, really beautiful connection over her work. And so I asked him if he would be willing to do the zine with me, which I don't usually do. You know, I publish other people's work, but I was like, no, this is perfect, right? We share enough of the same background and this really deep, passionate love for Dorothy Allison's work in this way that is very personal, and this will be a meaningful collaboration. But about 2 months later, he was also dead. He died in January of this year. Um, and fortunately and unfortunately, a lot of what I love about Devon applies to Dorothy Allison too. Um, this way of transforming the shit that life has dealt you into just this fierce, biting humor and a fierce, biting love, this sort of approach to life that is neither ironic nor unironic, um, but just sort of facing it and laughing in the face of it, I guess, and refusing to be a tragedy no matter what anyone else says about your life. And I guess I don't mean any of this to personalize my non-relationship with Dorothy Allison. I never knew her personally. I have never exchanged even a word in a DM with her, right? But also on the flip side, I don't want to intellectualize my relationship with Devin. It's just that there's a reason that we were writing together, a reason that this collaboration emerged the way that it did. And in a lot of ways, Devin was a mirror for some of the elements of my life that I didn't really share with anyone else, right? Um, there were aspects in our history that very few people, if anyone in my life, could possibly understand. So that's my big project right now. I'm working on finishing the zine for both of us and honoring the both of them, which is an interesting flip. Um, it started, well, it didn't start this way, but in the second iteration, it started as a sort of in memoriam for Dorothy Allison, and now I'm working on integrating all the elements of Devin's life and what made us both feel so passionately about this into it as well. The other sort of inspiration project compendium here is a little funny and a little sad, I suppose, like much of this has. I really didn't mean it to be so morbid, but that's where we're at. After Devin died, I was drinking a lot. It's not great, but it's where I was at. And just absolutely binge watching Grey's Anatomy. I think I've watched like 7 or 8 seasons in like 3 months. And I don't really know like why I started it. It's on Hulu. I don't really look around on Hulu for what's there. I just mostly watch Antiques Roadshow otherwise. But I was immediately hooked in the darkest way. Um, I think it was something about the juxtaposition of these just insane life and death situations setting the backdrop of the story, and then like relatively mundane but kind of overblown romantic or like otherwise interpersonal problems taking the fore. It's just this absolutely wild inversion of how we often think about storytelling, and in that like entirely addictive. Sometime in the second or third season, I had a dream with 2 of the characters in the show in it, and I woke up both like disgusted and sort of fascinated because I don't actually like watch a lot of TV. Like I just said, I mostly watch Antiques Roadshow, and the idea that these like really hyperbolic fabrications from one of the biggest cultural moneymakers of the 21st century, Grey's Anatomy is like a fucking monolith of all of the sort of hospital TV shows that there have ever been. The idea that that could take up that kind of space in my subconscious feels really wrong in certain ways and like counter to some of the things that I believe about myself. But, we're all susceptible to advertising sometimes. And since then, I've had 2 or maybe 3 more dreams with characters from the show in them. And on a day when I like, you have those days in therapy where you're like, yeah, everything's really fucked up, but I'm not in it. I can't think of anything meaningful to say. I decided to bring it up to my therapist. We do dream work from time to time, and it's been really fruitful. So I was like, fuck it, let's have a silly dream day. And I told her about my series of Grey's Anatomy dreams. She was really quick to sort of point out that I had grown up in a both emotionally volatile and like highly medical environment. I'm from Rochester, Minnesota, where the Mayo Clinic is from. And if you haven't been there, the Mayo Clinic ostensibly is like the best hospital in the world, or at least they keep saying that. But if you haven't been there, it's like really hard to sort of describe how overwhelmingly medicalized that city is, especially if you're downtown. There's subways and skyways connecting the clinic to like every other part of downtown. So you can just be wandering around in the skyways and be like, oh, fuck, I'm in the morgue now or whatever. Right. So, she's like, yeah, this makes sense, Jimmy. But she also, we did some other dream analysis, and she was talking about the way that, like, doctors and dreams symbolize change and, some of the more personal resonances with characters in the show that I suppose I'll save, because it's kind of a lengthy digression. But I'm clearly working through something in that, so that's funny, goofy, and, anyhow, I decided I'm gonna do a zine about my Grey's Anatomy dreams. I've been in, like, a serious writer's block for some time now, and it seems like a low stakes and, like, kind of goofy way to get some gears turning. Um, it's not a fanzine per se, though I won't say it's not in that lineage, but more so using this really silly cultural investment to get at the heart of something. It seems like a good way to go where I'm trying to go. Although, if I'm being for real, like on a storytelling level, I do really admire a lot of the sort of soap opera-esque elements of Grey's and shows like it. It's total fantasy, right? Like most of this would never happen. It's a total dream world in the sense that it sort of straddles the line between reality and the absurd. And it's very psychoanalytic, functioning on the one hand is like a hyperbolic, symptomatic working through in the Freudian sense. None of my friends behave like that when it comes to relationships or even friendships, but we all might like to, like somewhere deep down, like we want to freak out in that way or have that reaction. And then there's this undercurrent of mortality that drives the whole thing, this intertwining of sex and death on very real and also very unreal levels that functions as a major return of the repressed. But if Meredith Grey is facing it instead of us, if it's just far enough away but close enough to home, it functions as a safe outlet. I would absolutely love to be able to elicit that level of emotional response and investment in my writing. Um, Fassbinder was wrong about some things. He was right about many more, and one of them was to look to the soaps for inspiration. A few other inspirations, now that I've divulged my 2 projects, would be my friends Maria and Elise in New Orleans, Lynn Carell, my longtime collaborator. We did the Make the Golf Course a Public Sex Forest book together, and I am just continually impressed by their sheer dedication to getting shit out there and doing what they love and being there for people in this really magical way. Certainly the people I live with, June and Julie, the other people in my band, they write all the music and then I write the words and then we do this funny dance. We were just on tour and that always sort of drives home just how much of a collaboration it really is. Where sometimes I can get in my head about the words being this like really important thing in an outsized way. And it's like, no, it's all of us. We're all here together. Not that I think that I'm more important than them, but just, it hangs in the balance. Moving on. If money was no object, what would be your dream project? Oh, it's really hard to think about this question in terms of like a project rather than like, oh, I would like pay off my dad's mortgage or like get everyone around me and not around me everything they need. But I guess I would take it at face value and assume that if money was no object for me, then like it would also not be an object for everyone else. I guess I'd probably keep doing what I'm doing, right? I would want to make even more beautiful checkbooks and, Virgin to Real books someday for people whose writing I like. And just really up the ante, I guess, on materials and production costs. I'm already invested in making the things I make beautiful, but a budget is a budget and time is time. And beyond that, I mean, there's a lot of things I want to do that there's no time or money or time as money for, a lot of mediums I'd like to branch out into or incorporate into my existing practice. And I already work in a lot of mediums, right? Beyond writing and sort of, zine production and so on. I make prints from time to time. I paint, but nobody will ever see that. That's the one that's like just for me. I do a little bit of clay work here and there. I sew, right? But none of these things get my full attention or even as much attention as they deserve. So I guess it's less of a project and more this sort of incipient desire to be able to roam rather than prioritize. This creative syncretism I was talking about earlier with regards to the way I grew up and the people around me that I saw, modeling. Uh, I should have put her in the inspirations, but my stepmom, Jackie, who's a tattoo artist, also like made cardboard puppets for and with us when I was a kid that would have these really interesting, pieces of trash, right, that she incorporated into them. She's made felt masks and costumes. She did woodworking for a while, and she did all of these things really, really well, or does all of these things really, really well, I should say. Um, and I've really taken that to heart. I find it really inspiring. Anyways, let's move on again. Is there a quote or a motto that you work by? I don't I don't have a motto. There are phrases that, come into my head more than others, I guess, but some of them are really stupid. None of them are really words I'd like to live by. Um, hmm, I don't know. I have this piece of paper stuck to my bedroom wall that says, I hope I get it right because I'm not looking at it right now. Use your mind, use your body, don't be too idle, spend time with the right people, don't get caught up in the party, giddy up cowboy. I might be missing one or have substituted something, but that's the gist. And I got real drunk one night, 2 or 3 bedrooms in my life ago and was feeling real fucked up about the way I was behaving and the priorities I was, I guess, utilizing at that time. And I was like, if I just write this down, I'll change my life. But, I do look at that often and be like, yep, I'm doing some of these things right. And some of these I could think about. So I'll give that one to myself. And then next to it, there's a one-page zine called Fuck Eyes, and it's just a little piece of paper folded in half, but on the outside, it's like some photos of a naked guy outside gardening or something, and all it says is, "Farm boys love their cock." So I think those being the first 2 things I see every day has to count for something, by way of a motto or what I'm working by in life. What do you do differently from other people? I mean, I don't know. I think people are more the same than different overall. And I think that's really worth remembering in the present overwhelm of fissures and micro trends. But on a deeper level or another level that could be parallel, it's difficult to think of a part of my story that couldn't be told about anyone else. Like, altogether, sure, I'm a unique person, but people have written about these things before. People have lived this life, maybe not in the same ways, but they've done it. And I think that's okay. It's reassuring in a way. Um, I guess more to hand, what comes to mind is that people close to me have told me that I'm the same all the way down. That over time and as I sort of reveal more of myself, as you do in any kind of intimate friendship or relationship, that it's always consistent with who I said I was or who I showed myself to be in the first place. And that like doesn't mean that I don't grow and challenge, right? But I don't know. I guess if I were to take this with humility or like not as myself, right? Like as a judgment of another person, I'd say that that assessment reveals a sort of integrity that I don't know that a great deal of people have. Um, and I mean this in no way to sort of aggrandize myself or make myself out better than anyone, but it is something that I'm proud of. And I think that while it's not unique, I'm not the only person who exists this way. That's a pretty good quality to have. Um, yeah. And I don't have anything more to say about that. And I have no idea what I want my epitaph to say, which is the last question. So I'll leave you all. Thank you so much to Ira for asking me to do this, and to everybody who supports Filthy Loot and all the other small presses in the world. Um, Sorry if I talked about you and you don't like it, but yeah, that's it. Have a great night.